Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. I'm Murray Darm, I'm the assistant editor of Ancient Warfare magazine. I'm on my own again, but that's all good. And I'm going to answer a question from Alec Johnson, I believe his name is. Let's have a look. I'm pretty sure. No, Andrew Johnson. Sorry, Andrew. I'll call you Alec. That was last time. I'm going to answer his question in a minute, but you too could ask us a question and you too could support the podcast. If you go to Patreon/Ancient Warfare Podcast, you can choose one of three levels to support the podcast, and you can even get a copy of the magazine either in PDF or print form. So do that, and that helps us do what we do. Now, the question today is, I was wondering how the intertwining of heroic figures into people's lineage, such as everyone having an ancestor from the Trojan War, was viewed by the common people. I wonder if it has something to do with a foundational priesthood type rule. It seems to me that people nowadays would love it if we could do something similar. So the interesting thing there is, we don't know, which is one of the things we've tried to avoid saying when we've been doing these ancient warfare answers, but it's unfortunately one of the things that we have to say more often than not. We don't know, we're not sure. You could go anywhere with that. But certainly in terms of the common person's perspective, we don't have many things in our source material that's written from that perspective. So we don't tend to get that kind of attitude reflected. You can read it into some of the responses, and certainly in terms of the way that the common people, for lack of a better term, refer or react to an aristocrat or a royal figure claiming that they have a lineage from a god, or later on from a heroic figure, that they support them and they buy into that propaganda, shows that it seems to be effective. So, and it's not just obviously in the Homeric poems, you've got the heroes and Hercules and all of these others that have direct lineage to the gods. And then moving on through history, you've got people who claim lineage from those Homeric heroes. You've also got the idea, of course, later on, whether it be Alexander, where his mother claims that, it was Zeus that slept with her, and then even Julius Caesar has the same story told about him by his mother. It continues. You've got a continuous line of people in the Roman world and the Greek world claiming an ancestry to the gods, but also to heroic figures. And it's not just about that lineage in that regard. It's also about talismans. You certainly have the idea of the talisman, for instance, of Alexander the Great's cloak, which is given to Pompey, or which Pompey takes, we think, from Mithridates, and he wears it at his own triumph. There's a sort of a, wow, I have Alexander's cloak. There's stories of Perseus having some of Alexander's gold plate, which he accidentally gives away to a Cretan mercenary who then asks for it back, gets it back, and then refuses to pay the price he agreed on, so they steal it from him. But all the way down to Attila the Hun, finding the sword of Mars. So there's talismans which show divine approval all the way through, and that's not just ancient Hellenist and pagan religions. There's a Christian aspect to it too, and obviously going into the medieval period, you start to get relics, and the idea that a relic can inspire an army to win, like in the First Crusade and things like that. They start in the Byzantine world, and indeed Constantine's mother is regarded as one of the first sort of people to really start publicizing that idea. So there's lineages all through ancient history, both in the Greek and Roman worlds and other worlds. And I think the funny thing about it is these individuals that we highlight are obviously all the big names of ancient history. But I think when you go down to a lower level, and I'm being very analogous here, people of lower levels will have claimed similar legacies and similar lineages themselves. And so, you get that down to this day, that if someone comes from a particular region or a particular country in that case, or a particular ethnicity and culture, they are inheritors of that tradition. And funnily enough, of course, we get that all through history, that the Italian princes of the 16th century saw themselves as the inheritors of Roman tradition, and traced their lineage back to Roman emperors and things like that. But I think that the common people, for lack of a better term, would have been doing the same thing. And you see that in the pride around their city, the pride around the stories of their ethnicity and their culture. And there's even a market for it when you start to read things like Pausanias, Strabo to a certain extent as well, and lots of other authors who tell these stories of particular locations. And it's clear that their source material has come from someone local who's proud of their culture and who they inherit their lineage from. And in a way, even though, for instance, if you take Achilles' Myrmidons, there would have been people who claimed that they were descended from the Myrmidons. And whether you take that claim with a grain of salt, and even though the glory days of that culture were behind them by centuries, if not millennia, there's still that sort of sense of pride. And from a military perspective, there's a sense of martial pride. You see today how we view the Spartan legacy and how flawed that is. But when you go back into the ancient world, we have people writing in the 2nd century AD about Sparta, and going back to the centuries BC about how amazing Sparta is. But Sparta hasn't been a powerhouse of Greek politics since the 4th century BC. Athens is the same. So a lot of them lose their autonomy, and then the Greeks, and in general, after they've been defeated by the Romans in the 2nd and 1st century, 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, we have the entire intellectual superiority of the Greeks and the Second Sophistic, all the way through, the Roman Empire, where they're claiming some kind of superiority because of their ethnicity in being Greek and being from Athens or being from Pergamon or somewhere else that is a sort of a legacy. So I think in a lot of ways, that kind of lineage claiming is something that a lot of people bought into. And we can see in some of the propaganda that people believe it of their politicians as well. When we hear about Pisistratus getting a tall woman to ride in his chariot so that he can claim that the god's with him, people buy that. People buy that story, and they buy that mythology, all the way through to ideas of some kind of divine guidance or divine lineage that the ruler, generally the ruler, can claim. So I think the reality of that kind of lineage claiming, which we can still see today, there are people who will claim lineage from various different cultures and types and ethnicities and all these different things, that in the ancient world they've got all of that to access, and that they will claim it and believe it as well. And so I think that it really is a sort of a people buying into the propaganda of ancient rulers claiming lineage from the gods and others, and some of them would have had it themselves. They might not have claimed to have been descended from Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, but they would certainly have claimed to have been descended from one of these great cities, men who did these amazing deeds, and therefore the potential would always be there from anyone in the ancient world that they too could achieve those great things if that's how life turned out.